All right, let's get into it. Today, we're tackling the brand new 2025 Global Multidimensional Poverty Index report. And this year, there's a huge new piece to the puzzle. For the very first time, it's directly connecting the dots between poverty and the very real growing threat of climate change. This is a big deal.
So here's how we're going to break this all down. First, we'll get clear on what the MPI actually is. Then we'll hit the big global numbers, the facts and figures you need to know. After that, we'll introduce the game-changing idea in this report, something called the double burden of poverty and climate. We'll zoom in on South Asia, where this story is playing out in a really critical way. And then we'll wrap it all up with some key takeaways, specifically designed to help you ace your exams.
All right, first things first, let's really get a handle on the tool we're talking about here.
You know, for the longest time, when we talked about poverty, we drew a line in the sand, usually something like $1 or 2 a day. If you were below it, you were poor. If you were above it, you weren't. But does that really tell the whole story? I mean, does that truly capture what it means to live in hardship? The whole idea behind the MPI is that no, it really doesn't.
So, this is where the Multidimensional Poverty Index, or MPI, comes in. The key word here is multidimensional. It's not just looking at one thing, like income. It's looking at all the different hardships, the deprivations that can hit a person at the same time. It's about seeing poverty as a web of interconnected problems. Are you getting enough to eat? Can your kids go to school? Do you have clean water? A safe home? It's about these overlapping challenges. And here's how it's all structured. The NPI breaks poverty down into 3 big dimensions, each with a bunch of specific indicators. And for all of you studying for exams, here's a super useful mnemonic to lock this in. Just remember HES, because to get out of poverty, a person needs a really strong foundation in health, education, and their standard of living. HES, simple as that.
Okay, now that we know what the MPI is, let's look at what it's telling us about the world. Let's dive into the global numbers. The big headline number from the 2025 report is this: 1.1 billion. That's how many people are living in what's called acute multidimensional poverty. It's a huge number to wrap your head around. So the obvious next questions are, who are these billion people and where on earth do they live? And this is probably the most heartbreaking number in the whole report. Just look at this. Over half, 51% of all the poor people in the world are children. We're talking 586 million kids under the age of 18. It means that, without a doubt, children are carrying the heaviest, most unfair burden of poverty on this planet. And the data also paints a crystal clear picture of where poverty is concentrated. It's not even close. Poverty is overwhelmingly a rural problem. A massive 83.5% of the world's poor live in rural areas. That rural-urban divide is stark. Now, this next point is a really crucial concept, something the report calls the hidden epicenter of poverty. And this is something you'll want to remember. You might think that most poor people live in the world's poorest countries, right? And it's true, the rate of poverty is higher in low-income countries. But the vast number of poor people, we're talking nearly 2/3 of the total, actually live in middle-income countries. That's 740 million people. It's a hidden reality of global poverty. Okay, so we've talked about the big numbers, but what does this hardship actually feel like in daily life? Well, if you look at the most common deprivations people face, this is what you see. The number one issue, affecting almost 1 billion people, is a lack of clean cooking fuel. That's followed by inadequate housing, poor sanitation, and not having enough food. These are the fundamental struggles at the heart of multidimensional poverty. All right, now we get to what makes the 2025 report a true game changer. This is the brand new insight, the big headline, the undeniable link between poverty and climate change. This quote really says it all, doesn't it? The climate crisis is fundamentally changing global poverty. The big argument here is that we can't think about poverty in a vacuum anymore. It's not just a socioeconomic problem, it's now deeply, fundamentally tangled up with what's happening to our planet. And this is the key term you need to know from this report, the double burden. So what does this double burden look like in practice? The report zeroes in on 4 specific climate hazards that are hitting the poor the hardest. And again, for everyone studying, here's another great mnemonic for you, H/fad. It's like poverty has been hit by a new fad, but this one is devastating. H for high heat, F for floods, A for air pollution, and D for drought. H/fad. Okay, just let that number sink in for a moment. We started with 1.1 billion poor people. Out of that number, a staggering 887 million live in places that are exposed to at least one of those four HFAD climate hazards. That's the vast majority. But it gets even worse. For nearly a third of a billion people, 309 million to be exact, the situation is absolutely dire. They aren't just facing one hazard. They're facing what the report calls a triple or quadruple burden. That means they are simultaneously being battered by three, or in some cases, all four of those climate hazards at once. It's an unimaginable level of vulnerability. Okay, let's bring this conversation right here to our home turf. Let's zoom in on South Asia, because this region, it tells a story of two extremes: incredible world-leading progress on one side and terrifying risk on the other. And this right here, this is the heart of the paradox for South Asia. On one hand, you have one of the greatest success stories in human history. Look at India, lifting 414 million people out of poverty in just 15 years. It's monumental. But at the exact same time, there's this chilling reality. The poor who remain in South Asia are living in the single most exposed region to overlapping climate hazards on the entire planet. It's a story of progress and peril, side by side. If there is one statistic from this entire report that you remember for South Asia, let it be this one: 99.1%. Let that register. That means that for virtually every single person living in multidimensional poverty in South Asia, their life is also being directly impacted by at least one of these major climate hazards. It's not a fringe issue. It's everything. All right, we've covered a lot of ground. So let's pull all of this together into a super clear, exam-focused summary. Let's lock in the key takeaways.
Okay, takeaway number one: the core concepts and global figures. First, the MPI itself. Remember, it measures those overlapping deprivations across our three dimensions: health, education, and standard of living. That's our HES mnemonic. The formula is MPI equals HXA, which stands for incidence times intensity. Globally, the number to know is 1.1 billion poor people. And the key demographics? 51% are children, and 83.5% live in rural areas. Finally, that crucial concept of the hidden epicenter. Remember that 2/3 of the world's poor, 740 million people, actually live in middle-income countries.
Exam takeaway number 2 is all about the climate link. The big new idea is the double burden, this vicious cycle where poverty makes you more vulnerable to climate change, and climate change traps you in poverty. The 4 key hazards to remember are our HFAD mnemonic: heat, floods, air pollution, and drought. And the key exposure numbers: 887 million poor people are exposed to at least one of these hazards, and a staggering 309 million face that severe triple or quadruple burden of 3 or 4 hazards at once. And finally, our third set of takeaways focusing on South Asia and India. First, the incredible success story: India lifting 414 million people out of poverty. That's a massive achievement. But you have to contrast that with the South Asia paradox. It's a world leader in poverty reduction, but it's also the most exposed region to these overlapping climate hazards. And the killer statistic here is that 99.1%, almost every poor person in South Asia, is exposed to at least one climate hazard. On top of that, a majority, 59% of them, face 3 or 4 hazards at the same time. So what's the big takeaway from all of this? I think it's that this report draws a line in the sand. It makes it crystal clear that we can no longer afford to treat poverty and climate change as 2 separate problems to be solved. They are one interconnected crisis. And so the real question it leaves us with is this: as these 2 massive risks intertwine, how do we fundamentally change our strategies? How do we evolve to tackle this double burden head on, building resilience for both people and the planet? That's the challenge ahead. Thanks for diving into this with me today.